Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. Today we're on the estate planning of the rich and famous topic, and for today's episode, we're going to dive into the super well-known singer and songwriter, Barry White. Now, many of my Legal Tea listeners know who Barry White is, but in case any of my, say, younger Legal Tea listeners need a refresher, a few of his most popular songs are Can't Get Enough of Your Love, Baby, You're the First, My Last, My Everything, and my personal favorite, Never Never Gonna Give You Up. You know, really the height of Barry's career was arguably in the 1970s, but in the 80s and 90s, his followers remained. He just didn't have quite the big hits as he had in the 70s. I say that, but I think he had a pretty big hit in the 1990s. Wasn't that when Practice What You Preach came out? I think so. Anyway, we could be here all day talking about his songs, and there's a lot that we can get into talking about Barry's estate, which is the purpose of this Legal Tea episode. But first, as always, let's gain a better understanding of him as a person first before we dive into his estate stuff. According to his Wikipedia page, by the age of 19, Barry had married his childhood sweetheart named Mary. Oddly enough, we really don't know who Mary is, because she was just identified as Mary in his autobiography, like no last name, nothing else. They ended up separating in 1969 and eventually got divorced. But a handful of years later, in 1974, Barry married fellow singer Glodine James. Together, they put out an album in 1981 titled, which is not very creative, the album was titled Barry and Glodine. In 1988, the couple separated. But here's the thing, they never got officially divorced. They just remained separated until Barry's passing in 2003. So let's talk about his kids. Well, interesting topic, because according to his Wikipedia page, Wikipedia says that he, quote, at least has 9 children. And that's a head scratcher, right? Well, the more I dove into it, basically he had 4 children with his first wife, Mary, and 4 additional children with Glodine, his second wife. Around the time of Barry's separation from Glodine, which was in 1988, he actually found out that he had fathered a child back in the day in 1962. So there was our 9th child. After Barry passed away, his then girlfriend, Catherine Denton, claimed her infant daughter was Barry's biological child. Though, after testing, the child was confirmed that it was not a biological child of Barry. So maybe the whole at least 9 children thing just simply means that is the number that are indeed confirmed. Barry did not live the healthiest lifestyle in the world. As his Wikipedia states, Barry was, quote, overweight for most of his adult life and suffered from related health problems. He was also known to be a heavy smoker, reportedly smoking approximately 150 cigarettes a day, which was roughly 7 to 8 packs a day. End quote. Whoa, that's a lot of cigarettes. I tried to do the math and got myself all confused, but nonetheless, that's a lot of cigarettes. After a stroke in 1995 and another one in 2003, he was also waiting for a kidney. He was on the kidney transplant list. Honestly, his continued bad health prevented him from getting a new kidney. And ultimately that same year, and specifically on July 4th, 2003, he sadly passed away after suffering cardiac arrest at the age of 58 years old. So now let's shift to Barry and what happened estate-wise following his passing. You know, usually about this point in the episode, I confirm whether the celebrity had an estate plan. I am honestly embarrassed how much time, hours, I'm talking hours, I spent looking at no less than probably 40 articles, probably more, that some state that Barry had a will, but that it was not updated. And some articles state he died without a will. More said he did not have a will, but then I'm not really sure why the ones that said he did have a will would say that. So, for the sake of my sanity and time, I just gave up. I say all that about whether or not he had a will, but even, whether Barry had a will or not, there was still plenty of drama and headaches. But that was the drama and the headaches was Barry's failure at doing a plan at all or keeping his estate plan up to date. One of the biggest issues in the Barry White estate case involved his rather complicated relationship with his second wife, Glodine. So if you remember, you probably caught me say this, probably caught when I said this. If you remember when I was talking about Barry and his spouses, he was last married to Glodine, but they had merely separated. They had not actually gotten a divorce. I say that, but he had definitely moved on, and he was seeing that lady named Catherine Denton, remember? According to a blog from Peterson Law Office in Bloomington, Minnesota, Barry and Catherine had been together for 9 years. 9 years! So it was not like he and Glodine were just briefly separated. It was a rather long time. He and Catherine were even living together. So while he may have felt like Glodine was a thing of the past, Glodine was not a thing of the past from an estate planning perspective. And I feel like I should say, dun dun dun. So because, technically speaking, Glodine was Barry's legal spouse, she, according to their state laws, was the rightful heir of Barry's estate. Now that, of course, angered Catherine, and to no one's surprise, Catherine sued Glodine. According to a website, amomama.com, which sounds fake, but it seemed legitimate information. According to that website, Catherine argued that, quote, she needed to continue living her life of luxury, one that the entertainer Barry afforded. The website further shared that Catherine, quote, alleged Barry told her she would have enough money to live off for the rest of her life and could continue to live in their home in Los Angeles, end quote. In the court filings, Catherine's lawyers argued that it would fulfill the deceased's intentions. The conclusion, if that's what we want to call it, with this whole Glodine-Catherine debacle, was that Glodine got to keep his estate. Whether that's fair or not, that really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, there's the letter of the law. And if the law gave Barry's estate to his wife, Glodine, then, quote, the deceased's intent, which was not written down, is meaningless. If we let something like that slide and, hold that, merely verbal, he said, she said kind of thing hold up, can you imagine the can of worms that would open up? Oh my gosh, I can. Anyway, Glodine could have really been by the book and could have kicked Catherine out of the house. But surprisingly, according to an article on Medium.com, Glodine actually allowed Catherine to live in the house, but she received nothing else of significant value. When I say she, Catherine received nothing else of significant value. The drama and the headaches don't stop there, though, my friends. After Barry passed, and during and kind of after the Glodine-Catherine stuff was happening, stuff happened estate-wise with Barry's children, too. I'll quickly mention two things that happened kind of kids-wise. So first, when I mentioned earlier about Catherine's young child, that she claimed was Barry's, but it got confirmed that the child was not Barry's biological child. Well, that got confirmed after Barry passed away. Through the Glodine-Catherine stuff happening, that's when Catherine tried to claim her child was Barry's. The court made her get a DNA test, and that's when it got confirmed that her child was not Barry's biological child. A second thing kiddo-wise that happened was not one, but two of his kids caused a stink. One was his son, Daryl, and remember the child, the second one was, remember the child that he found out about much later in life? The other child was her. And for reference, her name is Denise. Anyway, so both of these kids basically, alleged that they essentially deserved money from the estate. Daryl, according to the Amo Mama website, said that he, quote, sued with claims that he was living the life of a needy and homeless man due to failed promises of Glodine of giving him a fair share of the estate, end quote. And Denise argued, so that's the other child, Denise argued that her dad Barry let her, quote, use his homes and cars and she was hired to assist him. She further shared that she continued to receive money and privileges until 2013, which, keep in mind, Barry died 10 years earlier. And that's when money abruptly stopped for both Daryl and Denise. Like I said a few minutes ago, many articles I read in my research conflicted with each other. Whether, it was on major things like, whether there was a will or not. There were also a few smaller things too. Like a few articles mention a trust, and they mention it's called a Barry White Trust. In some of the articles I read, those two kids were receiving the money, Denise and Daryl, that I just got done talking about. They were receiving money of payments from the Barry White Trust. I looked and looked and looked and looked for more information on this trust, but I have to wonder, since I could not find anything, if Glodine created a trust after she received Barry's estate, and since Glodine is very much still alive, maybe we just won't really know much of its contents until after she passes. Maybe. We'll just have to wait and see, I guess. There's just a lot of conflicting information out there. So as we begin to wrap this episode up, I think there are two big takeaways here. First, it probably goes without being said, but oh my goodness, Legal Tea listeners, relationships and marriages are really, really important. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that Barry and Glodine were still legally married. So the fact that his health began to fail and no one really thought of that just makes me scratch my head. Maybe it's because I do this estate stuff for a living, but seriously, no one thought about the marriage to Glodine and how that would impact his estate if and when he passed? Or maybe they did, and maybe Barry just thought, oh, things will work themselves out. Who knows? I wasn't there. You probably weren't there. We can only guess. Though if it's time to #do your estate plan and you have some unique relationships in your life, be sure to let your estate planning attorney know. Whether it's someone that you've been merely dating for many, many, many years. Is it a common law marriage? Is it not? My brain even goes to things like a child. What does the word child mean to you? If you have stepchildren or step-grandchildren, what does that mean in your estate plan? They're probably not going to count unless you specifically designate and specifically name them in your estate plan. And if you don't have an estate plan, can of worms, right? So relationships, generally speaking, are super important to know and understand in my little estate world. Now, the second takeaway is another simple one, and it's just to keep your estate plan updated. What's the saying? Change is the only constant in life. I think people don't know how much goes on in their life that directly impacts my little estate world. So if you haven't had your estate plan and the assets that support your estate plan, if you haven't reviewed all of those things in a while, it's probably a good idea to do so, just to make sure you have your ducks in a row. Estate planning is definitely one of those things that could become too late to address, for sure. I unfortunately see it all the time. Barry White waited too long. Whether he had a will or not, nonetheless, what was left was arguably a mess, and it became too late. Alrighty, I think we're ready to wrap this episode up. Next week, we're back to a cautionary tale episode where we talk about real life cases, real life clients that I or my office have worked on. During that episode, we're going to be talking about things that someone should consider if you have done an estate plan and then a divorce happens. Not only are we going to be talking about things to consider, but we're also going to be talking about things you should do too to make sure that your estate and estate plan come out on the other side just as clean. So tune in for that next week, Legal Tea listeners, and until then, take care and be well.